Hi there, everybody. My name is Kate, and welcome to my channel, Trinergy Awakens Naturally. So, happy equinox, happy eclipse, happy season, whatever season you're in. There's a lot going on, so let me start, my friend, with I wanted to address something that causes stagnation sometimes and causes a lot of problems and questions. I've got questions. And I remember probably 25 years ago going to a seminar about how to just affirm your way into, wealth, prosperity, and a brand new day. And I was confused as hell. Like, how do you want me to visualize this again? How am I supposed to build the feelings of being wealthy? I've never been wealthy before, and pull forward 25 years at least. That the download that I've been receiving this afternoon, that has been such a relief on my soul to hear it more clearly defined for me. Hopefully it's something that can help you if you've been stuck in a loop of wondering. I forgot to put my nose ring back in. Sorry, I'm usually checking to make sure that it's not, sticking out or having something attached to it from the inside. Not to be gross, but welcome to my world. Excuse me. Something that sometimes we get stuck in with the affirmation drill is that part of the power of affirmations can be more just getting into that feeling and that resonance and the freedom of allowing ourselves to know what it would feel like to be wealthy, to be loved, to be, financially independent, whatever it is, to be absolutely adored and loved in our family situation, to have that which makes us just really remember so much good stuff about ourselves, which is rarely, unfortunately, how that's couched in affirmation land. The newer understanding is that, and you'll hear some, spiritual teachers talk about it, that it's really about the feeling of what it would feel like to be standing in the presence of that life, which really just brings me to my greatest joy. Well, there's some hiccups on the way that I noticed for myself, and that, as I said, has been downloaded this afternoon for me, is that there's not really a way to fake it till we make it with affirmations and visualizations without really understanding the feeling and the connection there can leave us a little bit raw and unhappy with the results. And so it is possible to manifest through that manifestation process. It is possible to manifest by visualizing. However, we can supercharge definitely and most definitely break through stagnation if we understand a little bit more nuance about those processes. So the deal is 25, 30 years ago, whenever I first was introduced to Louise Hay and Wayne Dyer and affirmations and, moving through the stagnation of poverty mentality, I was given a lot of information back then that really didn't make sense to me because I did not grow up wealthy. And I remember having joy, as a child here and there. However, mostly I was dissociated, trying to run away, escape the horrible life that I was living, and cope with, what was going on in my world. And by the time I got to be an adult, the periods of sheer joy that I had experienced when I sang and did my music and things, which was where I spent most of my joy time, by the time I got to be about 15, those 3 years were magnificent and brilliant. And then by the time I got to 18, had to graduate, go to college, and oh my God, life got very ugly after that. And so it became very easy to forget almost instantly the rare moments in my childhood when I felt truly free and could remember back to that. And even so close as high school, I didn't remember the joy too much because I was being overcome and overrun with the misery of what was happening in my world at that time, of going to a college that really wasn't a good experience for me. And my music, the very thing that had kept me vitally alive, and that I had been in touch with and really growing and honing, and so happy to be getting my degree, it was being destroyed right beneath me, in front of me, around me, over me, everything. And so the very thing that gave me lifeblood and really gave me a reason to remember myself was being tainted, and it just felt so sacrilegious, and I wasn't mature enough or knowing enough to really say, yeah, I've got to separate from this. I just kind of went along with it because the trauma of all of it was too much, and I didn't have anywhere near enough information to be handling that with any class or grace, or even to know what was going on. So the deal is that how do we get into that consciousness of what brings us joy if we don't even remember a time that we could call joyous, honestly. And I work with people all the time that tell me they do not remember a time in their lives when they felt joy. And the first time that I had somebody tell me that, when I began working with people in the spiritual community and doing, coaching and healing sessions with folks, the first time that a person said to me, what do you mean, remember back, and I said, well, when you were a child, do you remember ever putting a puzzle together, or ever having, a favorite crayon or something like that just made you so happy? And they said the same exact thing about the music experience I had, is that, yeah, I had a such and such and my dad took it, or I had a such and such and my mom made fun of it, or my sister broke it, or something. And on top of it, if we had to go inside to look inside of us and we were finding joy within us, when we were told what bags of garbage we were and how horrible we were, that became polluted too. So many times these channels for that vibration to be able to bubble up and come through are contaminated, and they're filled with the raw data of another person that was projecting their nastiness onto us and shaping us in our childhood. Is a good time to destroy all those channels, or make them so contaminated that they seem destroyed. Excuse me. And some do not ever return. Honestly, I'm not ever going to be 5 again and bouncing up and down on the little bouncy ball having a great time. I'm not ever going to be that again. And so that channel, so to speak, has been destroyed to that actual time frame. However, the joy and the freedom of that, once I could work through the pain of those experiences being ripped from me, changed and defiled right in front of me, by people that really were ruthless and didn't care, about themselves, much less me. And so how do we fix that? How do we even address that when there's so much pain, 717, and there's so much tenderness and fragility in those areas? How can we build the plumbing, so to speak, back to those places where the child in us, that literal child for most of us, that literal child, the 5-year-old, the 3-year-old, the 7-year-old, the 15-year-old, whatever, that younger version of us, when that one had no idea how to cope with that, and they just had to hammer down, and suck it up, lest they be hurt some more. How do we get to that little child and remind them that it's okay, you're safe? Those are tedious processes that cannot be bypassed rightfully, righteously, or long-term, infinitely by any means of just affirming our way through that. I haven't found one person that sustained their wealth or sustained their abundance and all of the things that they called to them and manifested to them, that actually brought them joy. They stayed in, I consider that a karmic loop of manifestation. However, there is still always the need to be looking for the next best thing that seems to bring joy. And I really got stuck in those cycles with those programs and with that ideology, and I'm so glad that it's being better explained to me today to understand why that was so. I started doing my own life. I didn't really think about the connection. However, the connection is being made today, because the problem with affirming without having any kind of support with the human psyche of all the trauma and the damage that I sustained as a child, and then continued that on into my grown world, and right up until I left all of that with a divorce process. I divorced everything. If I ever knew you before 5 years ago, I don't know you anymore, and I'm good. However, without having some support through human psychology and psychiatry in terms of therapy and understanding and looking at narcissistic abuse, complex PTSD, trauma response, gaslighting, all of those things, dysfunctional families, integrated family systems, without looking at the human psyche, there wasn't any way I was going to dive into my spirituality successfully or sustain that righteously or rightfully, and that's why it never did, because I was hanging out many years in psychiatry and psychology, calling it, very, very mentally ill, and it did look that way, and it was treated that way. However, it wasn't addressing my spirituality at all, and yet trying to dive into spirituality without addressing this over here did not work either. And so the best therapy that I found for myself was to really go internally, and I'm not suggesting that anybody 1010 bypass either side of this equation, that human psychology is necessary to understand our archetypes, to understand our patterns, to understand where we came from, to understand our childhood, particularly if we have any kind of trauma, or we don't feel settled in our lives. A lot of things are called trauma that we don't even realize. We cannot turn that down any more than I could turn my spirituality down. So I'm not suggesting that anyone out here not seek help. However, if we think we're going to bypass one side or the other, I haven't found that successful for anybody that I would say is really stable and is really there and is continuing to grow in their infinity and their infinite understanding of themselves, or their spirituality, or their multidimensionality. I've seen people grow in their manifestation and they just kind of stay there at a glass ceiling. That's fantastic. However, the glass ceiling's not where I want to land 1111, because even with those places in my world where I was more financially stable, when I was married, we had lots more money, than I technically had after I got divorced. However, it still wasn't meeting the need, which was the first indication to me that something is wrong here and I need to rethink this. And so by working with the therapy in me to take all of that information of archetypes and psychology and therapy and be driven by my spirituality and my intuition and that which serves me best, to spend time in that quiet space, to use that heaven and earth, use that in conjunction with what was going to be necessary to understand my specific needs and circumstances, which needed to go back and understand dark shadow figures of great import in my world, the archetypes of, very ugly, nasty mother, and, the narcissistic mom with a narcissistic sibling, and all kinds of things like that, and a weak man, not being able to really stand up in his manhood because he'd been damaged by that as well, and how I was fitting into that, being a woman who stood up in more masculine in a very, unbalanced and yucky looking way, was trying to meet the need of what wasn't being met within me. And so getting inside all of that is psychology at a level that spirituality isn't going to explain that to me. The only thing that my spirituality and my spiritual team could explain to me or tell me is that there are human beings who have already laid this all out, and it's much faster and more direct and will get you out of suffering far greater, more efficiently than we can, Kate, by, nibbling it through a 5D or astral experience or lucid dreaming experience. We can't just lift you up out of that. You do need to work through that. However, we can't really do that as quickly as if you studied Carl Jung, and if you studied internal family systems, if you studied, those things, enmeshment, and, all kinds of toxicity and different mother figures particularly was my damage, and that is quite a bit, just FYI, on the planet, that we are coming back now with divine feminine to come in and balance a lot of the masculine that's been out of balance. And so we're not always taken into consideration without that spiritual component adding in over here to the psychiatry and psychology component, that divine feminine, when it's in an upside down masculine role, but it's archetype as mother, is not really a divine feminine. That is a woman, a gendered woman that is causing a lot of damage and still keeping the patriarchal role going and causing a lot of confusion. And so it was the melding for me of the spirituality and psychology, and human understanding and human dynamic, and understanding how does that all fold. And there are many people that actually do this work. Carolyn Mace is really great. She's got a lot of really good stuff to say. And Carl Jung, he was highly spiritual. He talked about dark empaths. He talked about empaths, period. But his work was so profound and well before his time, of course. However, he's often just turfed into Western psychiatry and psychology to understand the dynamics. However, his more spiritual stuff doesn't really get brought up, but he understood very well the beginnings 100 years ago of what it is to understand our spiritual nature as opposed, or excuse me, not as opposed to, in conjunction with our human nature, the subconscious, the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine, and how those roles get twisted, perverted, and turned upside down. And he was also, very balanced in his understanding of that. And now, over 100 years later, we have newer versions of those understandings coming through. However, if we just get told in an affirmation workshop, that you just put up your vision board, you write your affirmations, you say them, we can muscle through the energetic movement of energy. We can, and we can call things to us. However, we can also, cat just really wants to be seen and heard, I guess. We can call through to us those things, and oftentimes I've seen people draw themselves into, big purchases or big things that were given to them, and they lost them, or they did not respect them, or they did not really, it wasn't satisfactory, it wasn't enough, and it became the pursuit of the next best thing. And to me, I'm much happier, I'm far happier now to be very satisfied with my life on many levels, not every level, because I'm always looking to improve and get better with my game. However, if this was the peak and my last moment happened right now, I would be okay with that, and meeting, the other side, knowing, yes, 1616, I got to where I felt very satisfied with where I am as a person. It is far more important to me to manifest the best version of me, no matter how much money I'm making, because 5 years ago, I didn't have anything. I was dirt poor and was left behind in a divorce with no house and no money, and, lots of abandonment and lots of cruelty handed to me. And so coming out of that and being able to find the balance and the forgiveness for others and myself in that, as well as the clarity to cut that mess off and move it away from me and not mess with any of that kind of thing ever again very clearly, is the combination of understanding. Spirituality was telling me, just be loving everywhere you go, which I totally agree. However, it was human psychology and a lot of CIA studying of, human dynamics and communication and how to spot a liar, that told me about the boundaries of how to manage people when they're not standing in their most spiritualized, actualized, crystalline version of themselves. It wasn't going to happen by denying either side of that equation. It was actually far better for me to not understand affirmations as just I am, and even, putting them in the present tense. It just didn't ever feel right to me, and now I understand it better. So if you're feeling any stagnation, if you're feeling any, I wonder why this isn't working for me, it usually spins into what's wrong with me very shortly thereafter. And I'd like to say that perhaps, if you've had someone disrupt any of the beauty that was ever started in you, anyone ever crushed your dream, anyone ever told you as a child that, just destroyed your Santa Claus moment, that he doesn't exist, any of those that are unresolved, they cannot just be bypassed forever. We might get away with it for a while. However, I haven't seen it one time that it lasted forever, that we just affirm our way out of that. And oftentimes too, I've seen that people who start down the affirmation journey, their life falls apart when they start seeing those things, because internally there's a part of us that's going to scream and say, you don't really believe that, because there's work for me to do. There's something here that I need you to do, to pay attention to me, and I will find a way, somatically or medically or mentally or materially, Even if you have that new boat, even if you have that new truck or that new house, or the new wife, whatever it is, even if you have that, I'm still going to come and ask you to please address me, because you're not there fully. No matter how close you might be in one domain, you've left me here on my very own to try to figure out how to deal with the pain of you've overlooked me yet again, to buy us something new or to bring something in that really, I'd really like to commune with you and let you know about the pain that I sustained in having my dream crushed, and that there was no one there to protect me. And when we've had those kinds of experiences, it can be very hard to visualize what it would be like to be wealthy or to be in love or to be whatever if we've never had that. And anytime that we were loved before came conditionally, I don't want to recreate that. That's why visualization was never easy for me. That was a self-protective device that my team put into place, that, you're never going to be good at that visualization thing, because you already don't know what it is to be loved, much less tap back into that purity of your music and your childlike wonder. You don't know what it is to be loved unconditionally. Very few people do, so I'm not saying it was special just to me. However, the relationships that I had, they were very conditional, and they were very lopsided and very, abusive and toxic, and imbalanced and disconnected from any kind of spiritual, divine stuff that I really wanted anything to do with for real. It said it was, however, it really wasn't. And so visualizing that space and really saying, this, that, and the other, no, we're not going to let you do that, because we really need you to understand far more about that. And so as much as a person would not want to hear it, I know, I'm not always happy to hear it when it happens, that there's a point, a blip, a bump, a block of some kind. That's you got to look in here and see who is it that's asking you to please, I have something to say to you. I have something that I need to do, and I have something that can come through if you'll open up this corridor of understanding and the communication to come through. And I'm actually being given a remembrance of someone that I worked with and did some Reiki treatment with, and I quit working with her because it freaked me out so much. She was actually a Reiki teacher in the area, and we were trading some services at one time, and ironically enough, she never did give me a healing. I never went back, but I gave her a couple of sessions, 2121, and there was just a very dark presence that came up in the middle of this session that was an angry inner child of hers that was in her pelvic area. And it was dark, it was vicious, it was snarling, nasty, and was absolutely smelled horrible, and was just, was very protective of her sacral area, which I didn't know this woman other than we're exchanging, some stuff through some mutual friends, and where we're supposed to, and I said, thanks anyway, I don't want to, but I had done these sessions, and that second one, I was feeling very uneasy, and went anyway. However, I'm glad I did, because I learned, and I was very happy to cut away, that was protecting her sacral area that I did not know at the time. I knew when I saw this come up in the session that this woman is not anything that she thinks she is. I mean, she's got a lot out here, or right here, that she's not addressing out here, because it was the whole vibe, the whole, spiritual thing with all the jewelry and the look. And I'm not meaning to be disparaging. It's just when someone is just so very much over the top with the love, light, and joy thing, I'm sus already, honestly. I haven't seen that one be very authentic as well, because we are a human being, and I don't want to bypass that, but she also did a lot of things that seemed very, money grubbing, money grabbing, and money growling. Constantly sent me texts and emails constantly about a $5 class she was offering every week, a couple of times a week. And I thought, I'm on par with you. I do what you do. No, I don't want to come and give you $5, or donation, minimum, of course. And also got into a lot of playing around with poltergeist stuff and going to different places where they were moving tables and, channeling different entities, etc., which I don't doubt that. It's just that I don't want to talk to anything myself personally, and no disrespect meant, but I don't want to talk to or chat with anything that's willing to be, the clown show, what I consider the clown show, or the, spectacle or parlor tricks for people who are looking to convince themselves that, disembodied souls exist. To me, that's keeping them imprisoned in the same old paradigm that I'm doing everything I can to, leave and put behind, because it already is. It's not dictated by me. The age of Aquarius says we're not doing stuff the same way anymore, and that falls back there. And so as I was working with this woman, and I did know that about her, that she'd come back from a trip recently where, we were spinning the table, and it just made me feel really weird inside, and I didn't like it, and I didn't want to hear about it and say, okay, and I just kind of tried to shut her down as, politely as I could. But I don't want to talk about that. That's not something that I'm, really want to give my support to. You do you. However, I don't want to, and I don't want to hang myself up, listening to you or giving you any validation. I can kindly do, the service that I'm here to do, and I don't want to hear about the rest of you. But this thing, this little girl of her that was so traumatized, so angry, so vicious, that she said, whatever way she said it, dare not, come near me, do not touch any part of me right here. She was protecting that sacral and root area like a fiend. And okay, absolutely not. I'm good. I heard you. And I asked that part of her that I was seeing in the middle of this Reiki session, that, is there something that I can do for you? Is there any relief or, soothing that I can offer you? Because we can end this now, and I don't have to explain to the woken person, the personality that will get up in a minute and not understand why I'm closing this out. I don't need to explain that, and I'm willing to cut this off right freaking now, as opposed to have some weird battle over her body with you. This is too weird for me to do. What shall I do? Because I don't enter energetic spaces any more than physical spaces where I'm not allowed to, that I don't have express permission to. And that person that was lying on the table gave me permission. However, that part of her in the unseen didn't give me permission at all to be right there. And I don't remember how much longer it was. I think I was, kind of worked to just keep around her head and then move down by her feet. And after it was over, this woman, I felt compelled to ask her, because I was fairly new to seeing stuff in a healing session, and I hadn't done the Reiki session the way that she would. I don't do healing session the same way. Reiki doesn't look the same way. We call it Reiki because that's a convenient word, that I respect the training. However, there's a lot more that can come through for me, and the people that I work with understand that about me. However, I didn't know this person very well, and it was set up. So when I mentioned to her that, do you have, some problem with your hips and, your pubic area and things? Do you have a lot of pain in there? And she said, well, yeah. And then she got into a very anti-love, light, and joy. It went instantly from the soft and gentle, white light person. It went instantly to that very dark expression of that little girl inside of her that was filled with the rage of a mother wound and some trauma that I, don't need to get into. However, it was clear to me that you haven't opened up that channel because perhaps you're diverting your attention with being, enamored with poltergeists who want to spin a table and prove to you that that stuff is real. However, what is really real, that's probably, would be for me a priority, is to address that little girl that is so angry in me. I didn't tell her any of that though, because that's not my business. I just simply said, there's a lot of guarding there, because as I was trying to tell her, there was a lot of guarding in her personality. So she wasn't interested in her personality, nor in her body for me to do anything for her. And I cut her loose and just dipped out and said, okay, I'm going to go, and I'll see you later, and we'll schedule, the return and all of that later. And at that point, I didn't offer any explanation. When I got another week's worth of, come here, do you want to take your CEUs here? No, I already did them. Thank you. And no, thank you. I don't want you, because there's too much, incongruency in you. But yet she was manifesting, all of these things out here that were confusing me. And yet she wasn't manifesting her physical health without pain and a great deal of physical suffering that she needed surgery to be done, on her actual bone structure. So, and that's not a punishment of what I'm saying, that see what you should be doing. It isn't that. I understood the dynamics through that, the Carl Jung and the psychology thing. And I also was being given the spiritual thing, is that we have to understand this here. And when there's that much trauma and that much guarding, there has to be some place for that to come out where it's going to be seen or heard, in order for it to be dealt with. If my body's speaking to me on some level, and it's getting my attention, it's something internally that is speaking to me. That is just what I know to be true. And so if there's something that's happening external to me that's a spiritual thing, that is something that is true also. However, particularly within me, that's something in me that's asking for me to give it its attention. If it's external to me, it doesn't necessarily have to be me in the spiritual sense. It's something else that may be coming through, and they definitely can channel through other energies that are not associated with pain or sensation or something in my body. However, I'm not going to be able to get to any manifestation goal. At least I wasn't, and I haven't seen any consistent movement with anybody else who's done it without engaging both. That there was no way I was going to get to, my goal of reaching that peaceful place of remembering. Yes, I do remember, my soul remembers, even if I don't have too many instances on the planet, here being filled with joy for quite some time. I remember, my soul remembers being a cosmic being, and that I come from that primordial soup of just pure love. I'm not going to be able to get to that, and I did not get to that until I could work through those blocks of why don't I understand that. It's because I have a lot of things in the way that got in the way of remembering that I ever experienced it as a child, much less as anything before I got here, so I hope that kind of is explaining something. If you feel stuck or stagnant, that you no longer feel guilty or ashamed of yourself, that you're missing something, you're too stupid, you're too broken, you're not spiritual enough, you're not ascended enough. We are always enough. It's a matter that we just have to get through our stuff. I say just like, it's a simple process. It is a simple concept. However, the road to get there, the road to Damascus, has got a lot of things going, and many things get in our way. And unfortunately, if we're being distracted with other things that take us sideways, it can really keep us from getting very clear and digging in. That, like this woman that, I felt a great deal of compassion for her. However, I have to be honest, I felt the irritation of stop asking me for money and stop asking me to come and support your bullshit. I don't want anything to do with you. I don't agree with you. And rather than say it to her, because I'm not going to thump, out here in 3D, I'm not going to thump somebody that I wouldn't thump in, 5D. I didn't thump that little girl. However, I wasn't going to let that little girl come in and try to muscle me into helping her manifest her next trip to Ireland or wherever she was going to visit the sacred sites and bypass some more. That I don't have to be supportive of your journey the way that you're doing it. I have to be supportive of me, and I do not do disrespect in my world. And somebody marketing to me something that I can do for myself. Thank you. You're not offering anything to me, and we're not friends. So what kind of agreement do I need to have with you other than we have none? Please go do you and leave me alone. And I kindly dipped out and just blocked her when she wouldn't, unsubscribe me, please. And I still kept getting text messages. That's too persistent in your marketing, and I can tell you why. However, you don't want to know why, so I'm going to leave you alone to go do you, because that's the fair thing to do. That's the honorable road to take, is that I don't have to understand anybody else's spiritual journey at all, nor do I have to agree with it, nor do I have to condone it or join it in any way whatsoever. If I know it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for me. And after seeing that behind the scenes, I had a chance to see that up close and personal. However, now I don't ask to. When I know Spirit's saying, keep it moving, boo, I do. And unless I need to stop to know something very specific about it, it keeps me out of the judgment department of going, well, she should do this. She needs to do whatever she needs to do, because I need to do what I need to do. And the more that I pay attention to that and bring my joy through, it gives me an opportunity to break the old habit of wanting to get involved with putting my eye on somebody else's paper. I have my own work to do right here. And if I'm ever going to help anyone else, it won't be through judging someone or looking at them. It's a matter of discerning what works for me by bouncing off of, yeah, that doesn't feel good to me, so what does? Not that. Okay, cool. Well, I don't need to know why. And I definitely don't need to or want to get into any kind of, awareness of that, because I'm not going to be the healer or the helper with that, other than the blatant truth, which is in that non-corporeal experience with that inner child of her, that's deep and that's you. And when it came through out here, that's too much consistency. And when somebody is showing it to me out here in 3D, then I'm gonna let them go ahead and take their mystery, that I don't want to know what's happening in your astral self or your 5D or any other D of you that I can't technically see. I ask not to, because it's not my story. So anyway, I hope that's helpful for you in some way, and I hope that you enjoy your day, no matter what part of the day you're in. And remember to get within your skin, because your human psyche and your divine are absolutely fine. And when we marry those up and really allow that to balance, however long it takes, with the patience, of Job, I understand it's not always easy and we want what we want. However, that is the process that I see works. It's the one that I've, the spiritual alchemy of, many, many, many eons ago, the gnosis, the mysticism, etc., all says that to me. Spiritual science, that we can, attract more righteously, rightfully, and is actually more efficient and more healing for me and for everybody in divinity, if we all understand that there's too much trauma across the board to ignore it any longer, or pretend like that there isn't a way we're gonna bypass the rage or the hurt or the abandonment or whatever it is that we have inside. So if we still have it, and I don't believe anybody whoever tells me, well, I healed. When I healed and I did like 35, we're always in a state of healing and awareness. To me, healing is awareness. Healing is truth. And anywhere that I can stand in truth, I'm standing in love. And love liberates. It doesn't separate. And it doesn't bind, it doesn't suffocate. Love liberates. And so the next level of liberation that I can get to, that is healing. That's what I call that, for me and for everybody else too. However, I'm not in charge of getting anybody else there. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. So anyway, as I said, you're divine. Get inside and feel it, because you're divine. It is so, so perfect. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. And it's more than just fine. It's popping, and it's just loving you ever, ever, ever so kindly. I hope that you feel that. Please receive that and know that. And if you do not already know that, then maybe start the inquiry of, what kind thing can I do for me that nobody else can be expected to? What can I do? And before I think about forgiving my mother or forgiving my this or doing this, what can I do to me to not even forgive me? I don't even want to have that conversation, honestly, because that left too much shame for me personally. You do what you want to have to start the conversation with, I forgive myself. I want to meet my need. How do I do that to let that most terrified, unloved part of me know that I love you? It doesn't matter what anybody else has ever said or done. I love you. And start from there. And the conversation can unfold for us when we do, because it comes from within, not from without. However, having both sides of that equation helps that algebra and that math go much better, I've found. So enjoy your day, as I said, and get within your skin, because you're divine, absolutely beautiful, totally lovely, and absolutely fine. Take care of your beautiful selves, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye, friends. Mwah.